Good morning and welcome to Film Study 103. It's week 5. I can't believe that we're already this far in. I miss y'all. All right, so this week we're going to be talking about informational films. And I have attached to the assignment the slideshow. So if you want to kind of look at the slides and the notes, which are essentially the slides, you should be stopping every now and then to jot down ideas as we go through these together. So let's get started. Let's think about the beginning of our film study. And I want you to think about these questions because this will help your brain get back into the swing of thinking about what we've been talking about, how films are used, and what makes them unique. So some questions that you should be thinking about are all films and videos the same? Well, how are they the same and how are they different? What makes them unique? Another question might be, why do people make videos? What's the point of them? What is their purpose? And then to kind of get your brain thinking a little bit more is, what are the different kinds of films that you remember learning about or thinking about in our past film studies? So right now, I want you to take a minute, get your note sheet out, switch between Notability and this video, and answer these questions. How are films the same? Are they the same? How are they different? Why do people make them? And what do you remember about our film study so far? When you're finished, unpause and we'll move on. So this week, I want you to take away this idea. Informational films are films or videos that are based on very specific people, places, and events. That makes them different from narrative films because narrative films are made up about imaginary events. Maybe they might be based on real things, but they are fictionalized, right? So informational films they propose, they say that they're there to share information. I want you to note that there's an asterisk next to information, which means that there's something that we need to consider. And we'll come to that in a few minutes. All right, so your task right now is, can you think of some examples of kinds of films that would fit this definition and list them on your note sheet? So hit pause, write down some different examples of films that might meet this definition. So look at your list. Do any of the things that you have on your list match what I have? And am I missing some? So I wrote down things like lectures and tutorials, so something like this particular lesson, a documentary, and there's lots of different kinds of documentaries, they're not all the same. I love those little DIY videos where you can learn how to do a craft or make a recipe. There's a lot of them floating around right now. And then news broadcasts. Those are also informational kinds of film and video. Great. So have you seen any examples of any of these different kinds that might be worth sharing? If you have, you might send those to me or jot them down in your notes. If you didn't come up with any ideas, now would be a good time to jot some of these down. All right, so we're going to do something together here. We're going to watch some examples of different kinds of informational films, and we're looking to see what makes them different from narrative films. Those are the kinds of films that we studied for the last 2 weeks, right? So as we're looking at these, I want you to jot down what you notice that, gosh, that's something that's unique to this kind of video. You might be thinking about camera shots. So how does the videographer set up the camera? How are the angles used? Are there things that you're noticing with text or graphics? Maybe the audio, like is there use of sound or music that's different? Think about the format, that's the structure, right? And I noticed there's a typo there, sorry. So those are the things to be looking at. I'm going to try to play some videos on my screen for you to watch. If they don't work here, then you'll stop and you'll just watch them in the slideshow that is linked to the class, okay? All right, so here's the first one. This is one of those do-it-yourself little recipe tutorials. So I'm going to push play here. All right. So when you were watching that, what did you notice? What are the things that you saw about the camera angle or the transitions? What did you notice about the audio? And did you notice anything special with text or graphics? All right. Take a minute to write those things down that you noticed on your note sheet, and then unpause and come back. The next example is of a news broadcast, and I just pulled CNN 10 because I know that you're all familiar with CNN 10. So we're going to watch a clip of today's CNN 10, and we'll go from there.
We're launching into a new edition of CNN 10, and we're happy to have you aboard. I'm your captain, Carl Azus, and the reason we're making this sound like a flight is because we're about to take flight with a report about a space launch that's scheduled for later this month. It'll carry 2 astronauts to the International Space Station. That's been done many times before. What's different this time around is how they'll get there. They'll be launching from American soil for the first time since 2011. They'll be launching in a newly designed spacecraft for the first time since 1981, and they'll be launching aboard a SpaceX capsule for the first time ever. SpaceX is a private company that has received billions of dollars from NASA. It's been able to carry out space missions much less expensively than the U.S. government agency. The SpaceX capsule is named the Crew Dragon, and if everything goes according to schedule, May 27th will be the first time it carries people into orbit. Until 2011, the Space Shuttle was the vehicle NASA used to get people from A to beyond. It was a large winged ship attached to giant rocket boosters. The Crew Dragon looks more like the Russian Soyuz capsule that's been used to launch NASA's astronauts since the Space Shuttle program shut down. According to Space.com, NASA pays $86 million for every astronaut who launches aboard the Russian Soyuz. It'll cost around $55 million for each astronaut aboard the SpaceX Crew Dragon.
Ignition, liftoff, 55 aim high.
The dawn of a new era of spaceflight is upon us.
All right. What did you notice there? What are the things that you're picking up on, like audio, voiceovers, text, transitions? Take a minute to jot what you noticed down, and then come back. The final example is a documentary, and there are lots of different kinds of documentary. I found a super short one. I am not going to play the whole thing for you, just like I did not play the whole CNN 10 for you. But I want you to watch and see if you can figure out what makes this different from the news broadcast or from that recipe one that we just watched.
I love the light coming through the trees, light on water reflections, just touches the waves as they're about to break. It's all about the light for me. I was born in Grahamstown in the Eastern Cape, South Africa. My first memory of painting was going with my mother, and I used to sit with her and sort of top up her water or keep her easel steady. But I just loved that, and I often go back to that image. When I fell pregnant with my first child, I then started going to a painting studio, and it was from there that I really took off on my painting. I realized, gosh, it's really what makes me tick. As I walk into my studio in the morning, my heart's racing. I have adrenaline pumping through my veins. It's scary because I don't know whether today I'll get into that right flow. And I did that. I put my coffee cup down. I do like to doodle and sketch and tidy up or fiddle fluff around. Sometimes I start rearranging furniture in my lounge, and then my creative juices start going.
Okay, so if you want,
It's just that.
If you want to watch the rest of this, you can click on the link. I am not sure if it will work for you, so if it doesn't, send me an email and I'll find a way to get it to you. All right, so now that you've looked at camera shots, angles, use of text and graphics and voiceover and audio and transitions, what are the things that you noticed about how informational films use things differently? So with camera shots, for the news broadcast, it's directly face on when they're talking to us. If they're interviewing somebody, that person tends to be over here off in the third, right? The rule of thirds, and their eye tends to come just next to the camera. So you'll notice that when there's direct reporting versus an interview. The fact that there are lots of interviews are something different about informational films. I notice lots of images and archival footage. There's a lot of shots of people doing the things that they're doing, and it's not necessarily a story as it is just them going about their day. In documentaries, it tends to be like archival or old footage or images of maps or pictures that are brought in. In the news, sometimes they'll have the broadcaster talking, and then they'll have a little window up here with somebody's a video or somebody else talking. There's lots of tables and figures and text, right? The other thing that you might notice is that there might be intro and outro music. So think about CNN 10 on that Yumly video. There might be logos and branding. So these are the things that when you put them together, create the recipe essentially for an informational film. And each of those subgenres, right, of news broadcast, tutorial, DIY, have different recipes. But they're very different from the narrative films. Right? So at the end of the day, you need to know what an informational film does, right? It presents information about a specific person, place, or an event. It uses the camera codes and conventions differently. And we need to reflect here for a moment. Does an informational film mean that it is unbiased? So when you're watching documentary films and informational films like news broadcasts, how does bias show up? I want you to take some time to think about this, and you might do an experiment, right? You might find an example of a documentary to watch, and there's a whole bunch of lists of links to documentary films in the extension activity. You should maybe partner up with your partner from class, find somebody at home to watch one with, and look, is it unbiased? Or look at the different ways that different channels share news and information. So like watch your local news station, watch news out of New York, watch news out of Washington, D.C., maybe even look for those same stories out of Canada and the United Kingdom and Australia, and look to see, does culture, does nationality, does interest change the way it's reported, and how does that show up? Your final task is to compare and contrast narrative and informational film using this Venn diagram. Remember that the overlapping part of the circles should tell me what they have in common, and the parts of the circles that are not overlapping are what is different about them. When you're finished, turn in your notes, including that Venn diagram, to this assignment.